the real politics of a person plays out in the family.
Are you a perfectionist?
I'm a total perfectionist.
Okay.
I mean, I took 7 years to write.
We have another saying in Arabic. I don't know why I'm my mother today, but anyway, I'm not going to do this every time.
You know, I've made an artwork of my
did you?
bald paper
Did you
from the
really?
first book.
Would you be able to write this book having had the perspective of being a mother?
I really now don't feel like I've written that book. I feel like the book was written through me.
Avni, welcome. So happy to have you here. First of all, I'm going to confess of being a huge fan of yours and of your book. And my wife, equally a huge fan of yours. I'm not exaggerating, although I'm prone to exaggeration. But it's honestly one of the best books I've read in a long, long time. I reread it last few days. I want to dive right in. You've had some distance now from the book and the big success of the book. How does it feel today?
So the process of writing the book, I mean, it happened over many years. I think I spent 7 years writing it, and there were 8 different drafts, and each draft was a totally different book. I remember in between there was a draft that was almost like a partition story, like the partition of India in 47, and it
Oh,
went back
amazing.
to the generation of the grandparents.
So there's a book within the book,
Oh my God, there were many. There
and
was
those were taken out.
Well, these were entirely different drafts.
Okay.
And so it was, you know, for me, one of the major issues was finding the way to tell the story, finding the right way in, the right perspective, what I wanted the tone to be, how I wanted the voice to sound. And what I realized is that along the way, I realized that it wasn't for me to decide. I had to kind of just
Let it
be
flow.
open to how the story wanted to be told. And so it was almost like the story had its own intelligence. And if I stepped out of the way, that voice would kind of come through. And that's, we can get to that, but that's kind
Yeah.
of been a part of my journey.
Because
But
it's very, very layered, right?
yeah.
So there's lots of layers here. The characters, almost nothing is simple.
Yeah.
Not even no surface level here at all. You have a layered personalities interacting with each other in a complex society within a town in India, and then you have a second layer of sort of the Indian American interaction.
Yeah.
There's so many layers.
There's so many layers. No, you're right. And, you know, I think the story, the whole process was kind of complicated in that way. But, you know, it's interesting because I used to think that, oh my God, I failed and I've written another draft and what a failure. And I have to throw this away and start again. And I couldn't get the tone right. And I couldn't figure out how to tell the story in a way that felt crisp and elegant. It just felt so clunky and like I was kind of putting things together that didn't belong.
Can I just interrupt you for a second? Just a question on this, because you have these multiple themes going on, and then you have the multiple characters, obviously. Is it that you try to get the character development right and then kind of the story, as you call it, writes itself? Or there are overarching themes that you're like, no, I need to hit these themes, or a bit of both?
So I think when I first started, it was about, it really started with the scene that
Okay.
captured me.
Yeah.
It was this mother and daughter in a moment together, and they sort of haunted me. I felt like they kind of followed me around. I didn't want to write this book. I mean, there was nothing, you know, I mean, there was,
Doesn't
I
feel like
knew.
the kind of book you'd want to write necessarily. I think it comes out of you in
Yeah,
some way.
there was, and I had no background in writing. I never wrote fiction before. I used to love to read, but you know, my background was art history,
Yeah.
and I never thought of myself as the creative one. I was kind of the curator, or I was the art historian, or I was the critic. I was the one who was kind of circling the creative
Around the
person.
creative people.
And I think I had my own little insecurities about creativity. And but these 2 characters sort of followed me around. And, you know, the process started with lots of notes and lots of little scenes and vignettes and dialogue. And I would kind of walk through the world, or I would imagine moments that I had experienced in India. And I would just kind of write down a few sentences or an image that felt really beautiful, and it accumulated. And then draft after draft, I think it turned into, a bit more character development here. And then one draft, as I mentioned, was this partition story where I wanted to go back in history and really understand,
How did this happen?
how did this happen? And if trauma is kind of intergenerational, where did it start? Because, as we said, this is a mother and daughter story. It couldn't have started with this mother. This mother had a
No.
mother of her own, and she had a mother. And so I really wanted to go back and understand for myself in a way. And by the time I wrote the final draft, I think that there was a real psychic autonomy of these characters within me, that these characters could almost speak by themselves. And I really didn't have to do much else besides listen. And when I really saw that coming through, it shifted my entire perspective on writing, because what I had seen as these failures of draft after draft after draft, I realized that that was a sort of preparation. I had to do that work
To get to the
to
to
know
the
the
to the heart of
characters.
it, because the book does feel like you go straight to the heart, right? I mean, there's unfiltered moments. You have these fantastic one-liners. I mean, for a first-time writer, I'm not in any way belittling this. I'm saying it out of respect, honestly, and in many ways, admiration. It feels like a very experienced writer to be able to write these one-liners here and there, interspersed throughout the book, that are so powerful, but also feel very raw. What you're saying is there's preparation to get to the rawness in some ways.
Getting to the heart of something is not easy.
No.
It takes a lot of time. And there's James Baldwin says something so beautiful. He says that for him, and I'm butchering it a little bit, but he says that for him, the process of writing is finding out what you don't know. But then he goes on to say, it's also finding out what you don't want to know. And we all kind of have an inner resistance.
Yeah.
And I think I kind of walked around it or moved around the difficulty for years and years and years. And it was only through that process of circumambulating that pain that eventually I could land in the middle. So I think, in terms of failure, it's such a lie. Failure doesn't exist in creative work. There's just learning and building, and it all is a kind of accumulation that gets you to where you need to be.
Did you anticipate in any shape or form this level of critical success?
No, I could not have
So you
imagined.
wrote it because you felt you had this book in you, as you were saying earlier, and you needed to kind of release it out.
I mean, listen, there are amazing debut novels that come out every day. I have friends, who
Sure.
are novelists, and I've seen, the journey, and I never expected
This
anything.
intense level of success. Did you feel that you kind of also, at the time of publication, catch that zeitgeist in some ways?
I think so. I think in a
I
way,
definitely think so, but I'm curious in
yeah,
your view.
I think in a way it was a time where people were hungry for stories about women and mother-daughter stories, and maybe stories about India as well that hadn't been told. I mean, India is an interesting situation because the kind of role and image of the mother is particular, because of this,
Very.
because of the religion as well, because of Hinduism and this worship of the goddess, and the mother and the goddess kind of being, um, kind of melding into
Yeah.
one. There's a way in which the mother is idealized or even deified. And to say anything against the mother, or to kind of portray the mother in a negative light and not see her as this kind of all giving, all nurturing, all encompassing, divine feminine is very complicated for people and uncomfortable.
But you tapped into universal values as well, because yes, you're right. This probably feels to you like a particularly Indian story, but as an Arab, it feels very much like an Arab mother as well.
Yeah.
And the way it was portrayed, the mother-daughter relationship, is something I certainly can relate to in my own life, and think of a lot of people that have very fraught, very intense, very tense relationship with their mothers. and relate on so many levels
Yeah.
that come up. So I think you've tapped into something much broader than even, continent, if you will. And I don't know if you were aware of that. And even within that, I think there's mother daughter, there's trauma at multiple levels. There's sort of this, to me at least, this issue of memory and subjectivity of memory, which I find super interesting. It comes out in a lot of art with artists as well, kind of appropriating memories and playing with them and changing them. And you kind of do that.
I mean, I don't know how conscious I was of it at the time, but when you talk about the universality of the novel, um, I think the minute you forget about identity and you start thinking about humanity and you get deeper into, well, who is this person without their, their race, their
Right.
culture, the constraints of even their gender, like
Yeah.
who is the person without, all the societal expectation crushing them? Who is this person when they're just relating to the most important person in their life, who is their mother or their child? And that's when you can get into these really, the core of someone's humanity. There was another thing that was on my mind, which I think is very universal and also very particular to this moment that we're living in, which is that all over the world, we have a generation that's growing old and that's suffering from disease.
That's interesting. That's definitely there too. I didn't think of that.
And we have the younger generation of children that are now
Caretakers.
growing up and having to figure out, well, how do we care for our elders?
And the caretaking, can I just interrupt you? That, of course, you describe is also quintessentially Indian and effectively Eastern. Let's just call it that.
Yeah.
If this same person was in the US,
Yeah.
this would not be the case. This woman, the mother,
Would be in a
would
nursing
be
home.
in a nursing home. And again, I'm not making a judgment here. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
getting a visit twice a year from her daughter.
Yeah. And I wonder to some degree if even in kind of, if we want to say like Western countries where the nursing home is a more common thing, I don't necessarily believe that that is
Bad.
not complicated for people.
Ah, interesting.
I think that there is some kind of, I imagine this is
Mm.
kind of my imagination around it, that there is some kind of psychological pain around this alienation from the older generation. I'm sure to some degree it creates an anxiety in their children as well. What's going to happen to them as they get older?
Well, look,
And so I think this is all, I think just because this, for me, like societal and cultural shadow is really interesting and important too, because it's not just what the culture is doing, but what are they not doing? And how is that kind of playing
yeah.
on
I mean,
the
you just
psychology?
tapped into another universal value. It didn't even occur to me until you spoke of it. I mean, for someone who looked after both their parents as they were sick, in my mother's case, a very, very painful 18 months, um, I now realize as you're speaking that that's another um, emotion that was invoked by your book. That level of caretaking and the feeling that you really need to be there for this person at all times, but then that person completely transforms over this period, right? And you're not even sure how to hold on to the old image as they transform, and then you get completely confused. And this comes out very nicely in your book about the positive and the negative emotions, right? You they really flow and become one in some ways, right? Because that person is literally changing in front of you and falling apart.
Yeah. And I think for the narrator, it's almost like she becomes a mother
Yeah,
herself
yeah,
toward the end of the
yes,
novel. She also, her mother almost becomes like a child.
yes, 100%.
So she's got almost now two children that she's
Yes,
looking after. Plus, she's almost returning to her own childhood herself because her mother's illness is bringing up all these. It's kind of evoking all the memories of her
yes,
childhood. And
yes,
so I almost, when I was imagining them, I was imagining them as, yes, two grown women. But for me, it was like I was also just imagining these three little girls because it was not just this mother and this daughter, but how were these three little girls interacting with each other, and how was um that you talked about the rawness. I think like
There you go.
the most raw image I can think of is that kind of anger of a child,
Yeah.
or that kind of, it's just not conditioned. The child doesn't have a sense of
Regulation.
shame
Yeah.
around their
Yeah.
anger
An
or
emotional
anything.
regulation for that.
And for me, that's kind of how I saw them in the novel, all of them, even at all the different ages, even the grandmother in the novel who's kind of older. To me, there's a feeling that even she is, you really see all her childhood, or her anxieties and her fears coming to the surface.
One of the other layers that comes out is this Indian family, this Indian American characters that come in, live in India,
Yeah.
um, the tension, the patterns, the differences,
Yeah.
the commonalities.
Which is what I did. I
Yeah.
I was I was born and raised in the US, and then I moved to
Yeah.
India. And everyone thought I was a little bit crazy. Like even my parents said to me, we left India. Why are you going to India? And
But I can totally understand that. One
yeah,
of my best friends, who's Indian American, my best friend from college, moved to India for 10 years. And he grew up in a very comfortable suburb of New Jersey.
yes,
And after college, said, I'm going back. And his dad, I remember I was with him in the house,
yeah,
said, I mean, we left 20 years ago for a reason.
yeah.
And he needed to do it for himself. I need to have his own version and his own memory and his own relationship with India.
It was essential for me, and it still is alive in me in ways that I don't think I'll ever fully even understand. It was such a
How did that
important.
period change you? I mean, abstracting from the book for a second, in your own life as an American, effectively moving back to where your parents are from with your own vision and memories and ideas and ideals of India that probably clash with reality. How was that experience?
It's a good question. Growing up, we went to India very often.
Okay.
So
So it wasn't that abstract for you.
no, and very close to the family there,
Okay.
and they would come in. So I felt, I never felt fully American.
Okay.
I
Interesting.
always felt extremely Indian in a lot of ways. I think it was that constant going back and forth. My parents never developed an American accent. They never developed American accents.
Yeah.
They also, my parents, interestingly, never really became part of an Indian community in America.
Yeah.
They
kept their
kind of
roots.
they kept their roots, and they also were kind of the black sheep. They did things in
Yeah.
their way.
Yeah.
And so I felt very free to not fit in anywhere, not to be the Indian in America or the American. I felt kind of quite free to explore what I wanted to be and how I wanted to present myself and how I wanted to speak and what food did I want to eat. And there was a lot of freedom. For me, when I went back to India, it was really to engage with the art. That was kind of the story I told myself. I had, written my dissertation on contemporary Indian art when I did my master's, and I wanted to be with the artists and like live there and really experience, so I could have a very authentic take on the exhibitions I curated and everything.
And then what happened? What really happened?
And, it started that way. And then I was like, ooh, I don't know, the art world is really not for me. But I started to spend a lot of time in Pune, a lot more than I had spent even in my childhood. And I spent a lot of time living with my grandmother, who was at that time just being diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah.
And I just felt, I felt like I was losing something. I felt like it was almost like grains of sand. It was just like slipping away from me. And I felt that I wanted to record. And I got my camera, and I was just taking pictures, and I was writing down recipes. And
Mm.
I remember somebody from, I think it was Harper's Bazaar in India, reached out to me, and they said, we're planning on running this thing about food and memories. And would you be interested in, at this point I was already working on the novel.
Mm.
But they asked me to write this essay just about my personal experience of being in, around food and what it meant to me. And I just started writing about my grandmother and her kitchen and her kind of tremendous ability to cook and feed and nourish and nurture all of us, and she was just such a, presence for all of us in the family, this kind of pillar, and this feeling of loss, that I was losing something. And it was in that kind of
Moment.
crucible almost of all of that that I finally wrote that last draft.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It's just a page long, but
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
think you can see the seed of
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 this.
this. And it's almost like through that essay of that grief, the immediacy of that grief, that I found this voice.
And what prompted you going back or leaving India? Because 7, 8 years is a long time. I mean, at that point, it's home.
Yeah.
So that decision to again reverse course.
Yeah. I think, it was this outsider insider
Yeah.
thing. It was never, and maybe this is who I am. I'm never really at home.
Yeah.
And maybe this is why Dubai is a kind of comfortable
Yeah, and I
home,
think this is
because
how many of us are. I mean, when I left home, which is Egypt, my mother told me this in Arabic, "Ain fi Jannah wa ain fi nar," which essentially translates into one eye in heaven, one eye in hell, which is exactly that, that you basically will never again feel 100% comfortable in one place. You'll enjoy, you'll appreciate, you'll understand, you'll love, but, and that has been the case. I mean, from there, I went to the US and then the UK and then here. And then Dubai, in many ways, becomes very much a home for people like us,
yeah, I
I
think so.
think.
I think I'm very comfortable around people that are always a little bit homesick, but
Yeah.
not sure where
Yeah.
home is.
Yeah.
And a little bit, they have pieces of their hearts in different
Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's why I found a kind of tribe here,
Yeah.
where we're all a bit split in that way.
And when you left, and when the book came out,
So the book came out in India first
right,
under a different title,
right.
Girl in White
And
Cotton.
that's another twist that I
That is
found
another
out
fascinating
when I
twist.
researched this.
Yeah.
And the different titles, I mean, I'm dying to know, because the first one is self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Burnt sugar is not.
Yeah.
My wife and I debated this last night, but I want to hear the truth.
So with Girl in White Cotton, that was always the title. That was
Okay.
the working title from
Yeah.
the beginning, from draft one.
Yeah.
Obviously, the novel continued to change, but if you read the book, you see that image of white cotton
Completely.
is very
Completely.
strong in the book.
Completely.
So we kept that image. It was published first in India. And, my whole publishing journey is kind of another crazy story.
Because also unusual that you published in India, right? Because you'd think that, I mean, again, that's another thing that I found so fascinating is who's the audience for this book? But if I was writing this book, if I was Avni, I would think the audience is the American audience or the Western audience, and I'm introducing India and an American Indian story to that audience. But you published it in India. So
I don't know who I thought the audience was. I guess I was writing the book
Yeah.
I wanted to
Yeah,
read.
yeah, yeah.
So I guess I was my own
I was
audience.
thinking about that yesterday.
Maybe that splitness that I was talking
Yeah.
about is
And
something
maybe I was
there.
putting on my commercial hat, but I was like, why did she publish in India? I mean, that's surely not where her market was.
So it's interesting because I never thought of that. I guess I don't have a very
This is my
commercial.
investment banking side. Don't worry about
I
it.
don't have a very commercial mind,
Yeah.
but as I said, I didn't study
Yeah.
creative writing.
Yeah.
I didn't come out of a big MFA program. I don't come from a literary family. I don't have a big literary mentor at my back, telling me,
And
let
that's,
me
I think,
introduce
the
you
whole beauty
here.
of it.
Let me introduce you there. So I was really like cold calling and
Yeah.
emailing
Yeah.
agents,
Yeah.
do you want to read this book? I don't know if you'll be interested. I was asking friends for favors to introduce me here, introduce me there. It's very difficult to get an agent. I mean, I was nobody.
Also very young.
Yeah, and very difficult to get an agent to look at your work.
Yeah.
And so I was introduced to this wonderful agent in India who was really kind and open. And he said, yeah, sure, I'll take a look. And he read the first 3 pages, and I think he messaged me immediately. He's like, I really like this. He's like, okay, I'm going to get back to you. Let me finish it. And he finished it and he said, I love it. I'm going to represent you and I'll have an offer for you in 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, I don't believe you, but he did. And it was kind of miraculous because I couldn't get any London or New York based agents to even look at it. So, you know, a lot of people said it's kind of a mistake to go that way, but for me, it was really my only option at the time. I was fed
I want
up.
the book out. Yeah, I wrote it. I want it published.
I was fed up. I was 7 years in. You know?
Yeah, of course.
So, you know, he got a great publisher, Harper Collins in India, and my lovely editor there, he said, you know, I know this wonderful agent in Barcelona, and she's with this boutique agency, and I think this is totally up her alley. Do you want an introduction? And I said, sure. And she's my agent to date.
Oh my God. Wow. So she's the one responsible for the second publication.
And so she's the one who then sold it first in the UK to Penguin. And that was like a crazy moment when I heard Hamish Hamilton wanted to publish it because, I mean, I had to lie down on the floor because when I looked at their list, I was like, okay, they've published, you know, Zadie Smith and Arundhati Roy and this one. And these were my heroes, you know? So
they're all of our heroes.
But that was, I think, the moment where I was like, is this going to become something? Because I mean, like if they're publishing it, then, you know, I don't know.
Is this the next White Teeth? Yeah.
I mean, so I was, it was again, a very strange journey, but once it was sold in the UK, my editor there said, you know, Girl in White Cotton, it's an interesting title, but for people in a Western audience, they're going to think of a wedding dress. And I was like, well, you know, I kind of argued. I said, well, you know, white cotton in the Indian context, it's grief and it's asceticism and it's the ashram and it's mourning and widowhood. I said, it has so many meanings. And she said, listen, you can educate them when they read the book. You're not going to educate them in 5 seconds with a title. She said, let the title grab them and then you use the book to educate them.
And who picked the title?
So she came up with a list, and I really liked Burnt Sugar because I thought it had that, the sweetness, the bitterness, the cooking, the image of course, sugar and fire are these kind of powerful images in the novel as well.
Is there something that happens to sugar when it's burnt? I mean, is there?
It's like a caramel, but you can also burn it and it can become bitter, I guess.
That's exactly what what my wife was saying yesterday, and I was sort of like, I don't know.
It's more the tension, I think.
So it's kind of sweet until it's not, right?
Yeah.
Sort of.
How can sugar kind of be poisonous as well,
exactly.
right? So there's that kind of element in the book.
And since we're on it, and the reason I'm asking is I'm going to ask for a cameo. But when is the movie coming out? You're like, no, I'm in the cameo, not you. Why are you like trying to bring yourself into the?
As long as you don't wear white in the cameo, we'll be fine.
I'm going to go back in black.
I don't know when the movie's coming out. Honestly, Hollywood is very strange to me.
Have you sold the book rights?
So we're in talks currently with that, and I'm not sure exactly where it stands, but
Because that would make a fabulous movie, this book.
I think so.
No,
I hope
100%.
so. Yeah.
Make a fabulous movie.
I think it would be interesting.
Yeah. When the book came out, you had just had your first child? Is that right? So at the same time, and you were pregnant, I mean, towards the publication of the book.
So my first child was born already when the book came out in India, but I had finished writing it before he was born. Yeah. Well, it's a funny story. I was about to have my second child, and the book was about to come out, or I had just had my second child, and the book was about to come out in the UK, but it was longlisted for the Booker 2 days before it came out. So it was not even released in the UK when the Booker announcement came out.
So the Booker announcement was off the Indian version?
No, the Booker announcement was off this version, but the Booker has this interesting...
They get it early or something?
They have an interesting rule that if it's being published within if it's being published before the announcement is made, then it counts in that kind of calendar year. So my editor had sent them the proof copy, the copy that was being sent for reviews and stuff. And so based on that, so it was hilarious because I was kind of on this long list And everyone was kind of asking, but what the hell is burnt sugar? We've never heard of this book. We've never seen it in a
So it
bookstore.
hasn't been anywhere.
It hasn't been anywhere, so nobody had read it.
And then it came out, and then it went to the shortlist.
And then it went to the shortlist.
Wow. But that's after publication. I mean, after
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
available.
But it was amazing because the first week of sales were like excellent because it was already on this
Yeah,
list.
yeah, you could already say like shortlist.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was
What a
kind of
story.
interesting.
And the reason I asked about your children is I was wondering today, now that you're a mother, and of course, hindsight 2020, I'm well aware of that, but would you be able to write this book having had the perspective of being a mother? It would be a
No.
very different kind of book. I don't mean, would you be able to write this book? I mean, you wrote this book. I mean, has your perspective, I guess, changed? If
Yeah.
you would capture a mother-daughter relationship, being a mother yourself now?
Yeah, there's certain things about motherhood. I don't even know if I can look at those things anymore. There's certain like brutal things about motherhood. And I think it's true. Like I still look back at passages of the book and I think, "Oh yeah, that's exactly how I feel," or
Yeah.
"That's exactly right." But it's harder for me to talk about them now. And
Yeah.
I'm softer now. And I understand now in a different way than before that, as a mother, I'm just trying to do the best I
Yeah.
can, and
You're
so
more forgiving.
and I understand that deep ambivalence in a different way because I live it,
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
So I
So
think
perhaps the mother character now, to all of us, is a bit more sympathetic, right? You kind of understand also her, which comes across as so deeply unsympathetic in the book,
yeah,
right? But you're kind of maybe like, now I get her
yeah.
a little bit, some of her reactions.
There's a way in which when I wrote the book, maternal regret was more abstract to me. And now I see how, I mean, I don't regret my children at all, but there are things I regret about, like, for example, I am getting divorced from their father.
Yeah.
So even that, I have regret. I have moments of, oh my God, like,
Yeah.
am I ruining their life? Am I,
Yeah.
and so there's this, but it's so emotionally
Yeah.
deep
Yeah.
and dark
Of
now
course.
that I think I wonder sometimes, like maybe I would have written it from the perspective of the mother now.
Well, that brings us to your second book. So you are working on a second book that was out in my research. I mean, you talked about a book. I don't know if it's the same book you've talked about in previous press, because there was a book that you talked about, I think, in the last couple of years.
Mhm.
Is it still the same topic, or have you moved to something else?
It keeps shifting a little
Yeah.
bit because I think writing is so much a process of discovery for me. I almost learn as I write and I figure things out. I would say that I think my topic in general is families.
Yeah.
It's interesting, even if you're talking about politics, the real politics of a person plays out in the family.
100%.
Like a person can say whatever they want about their political stance in public, or they can go to a dinner party and say, I belong to this or that party, or this is what I believe. But how do you behave? How do you behave at home when no one's watching? To me, that's your real politics.
And how do you behave when everyone is watching? Because we have another saying in Arabic. I don't know why I'm my mother today, but anyway, I'm not going to do this every time.
Your mother's in the room today.
Yeah, I feel like it's a lot
Yeah.
of sayings. And no, but where like exactly what you said is, you really find out about a person at home.
Yeah.
When you go to their homes, you see how they talk to their children,
Their wife.
their wives, etc. But there's now the public and the private. So you are right. And I think being Indian, and again, this is another thing that I think is very much shared here in the Arab world, is the public persona very often is very performative. So it's not okay for the children to misbehave in public, or to what happens at home happens at home. But when you're in any public setting, there needs to be a particular type of behavior.
Yeah.
So that's a topic that you could, go on about for many books to come.
Absolutely. And I think the intricacies of the family relationship and also how they play out over generations and how families come together through marriage and,
Yeah.
even I find in-law relationships really interesting. I mean, it's just endless,
Yeah.
between siblings. I find that to be just very fascinating.
Do you feel that having been had the first book with such huge acclaim so early and so unexpectedly puts a lot of pressure on you. This is a bit like I follow tennis, Alcaraz winning, at a very young age. Now the expectation is so high. Do you feel that expectation or that pressure that you put on yourself? I'm not talking about your agents or your family or just you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's been kind of paralyzing,
I can imagine.
actually, and I think it's taken me a long time to work through that.
Are you a perfectionist?
I'm a total perfectionist.
Okay.
I mean, I took 7 years.
Well, no, but I mean, honestly, most perfectionists don't wind up publishing.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Yeah.
That's a huge step.
It took me a long time to get
you
there.
You release the baby out to the world eventually.
Yeah. Eventually it got out there. But I've had to really shift my perspective. And I think I've kind of strangely come back to the beginning again, which has been quite beautiful and strange. And it's like knowing it for the first time. And so I'm almost back to that point when I was in somewhere. I feel like somehow I'm back to that place in my grandmother's house when I was writing that first scene of Burnt Sugar. And there was no real motivation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
There was nobody pushing me.
Yeah.
Nobody cared what I was doing.
Yeah.
Nobody knew who I was. There were no expectations.
Yeah.
It was just devotion. That was it.
And you're able to access this now again?
I'm coming to it as a devotion.
Okay.
That's how I'm coming to it.
Okay.
It's almost, there's something quasi spiritual that's kind of occurring inside of me, I think, with this book now, where it's like, it's just about turning up at the page and being present with what's coming through, not judging too much, not censoring, not being so trapped and stuck in my mind with, well, the book was supposed to be about this. And I told my agent last month that I was going to write this kind of novel. And I told my editor that it's going to be about, a daughter and a son or a whatever, and just letting all of that go and just seeing what wants to come through. Because, one thing that I've really realized, and I mean, maybe I should have brought this up at the beginning of our conversation, is that I really now don't feel like I've written that book. I feel like the book was written through me. And that's a very different turn of perspective.
That's very interesting.
And I feel more like when you take the perspective of channeling something, as opposed to that kind of idea of I'm the inventor and the creator, that kind of godlike perspective of I created this work. There's a lot of pressure and anxiety around that because we're just human. But if you think of yourself as just this channel through which things come through, then you can be a little more detached and you can also be more joyful and you can just marvel in the beauty of what comes through.
Walk me a little bit through, this is my Tim Ferriss part of the episode, the process of writing. So as you're writing this book or as you're writing now, let's actually talk about now, it's more interesting. What is is there a typical process and what is it?
I'm really, really lucky because the wonderful team at Al Serkal at the foundation, and they've given me a little office, a studio. I'm kind of doing like a little residency there.
Thank you, Serkal. That's beautiful.
Yeah, no, they're just honestly so wonderful. And they've been such supporters of my work from the beginning. So I'm extremely grateful to them. And so right now I have the joy and the privilege of, I wake up,
going there,
take my kids to school, and then I go straight there. And I have this little space that's just mine, a room of my own.
Do you write longhand?
I've been writing longhand.
Longhand?
Yeah.
You have a notebook?
I have a couple of notebooks. I have these old school yellow pads, those legal pads.
That's fantastic.
And I have my Muji pens.
Okay, I was going to ask, is it a pen or a pencil?
It's a pen.
It's a pen.
Pens, yeah. Muji pens. They have the 0.7 tip. I love those pens.
And then do you scratch or do you erase or?
I tear the whole page out and
wow.
And I throw it. It's all very dramatic.
Okay. Yeah, it's like, okay.
There's a lot of paper.
Yeah. And you can sit for how long? I mean, do you take a break? How does it work?
I take breaks. I take little coffee breaks. I
Okay.
take breaks to eat. I'm much kinder to myself now than I was.
Yeah,
I
before
like,
it was like masochistic. Like,
yeah,
just need to
yeah.
get through
It was
this.
like it would just be lots of caffeine and no food. And now I'm like, I nurture myself more. I make sure I'm well fed and hydrated.
And is there like a goal, like every day I need to produce 3 pages kind of thing? Or some days it's 7 and one day it's nothing?
You know, right now I'm at the process where I'm just writing without judgment. So
Okay.
I'm not calculating.
Okay.
I'm trying not to look at word count, which is one of the reasons why I'm writing longhand, because I'm trying not to be so
Yeah.
fixated.
740 words, that
Yeah,
kind of
I
thing.
was
Yeah.
noticing, you know, I
Yeah.
was watching the word count rise, and then if I would delete something again, it would fall, and that would be a little heartbreaking. So sometimes taking, and you know, there's something about writing longhand that feels less formal.
Yes, of course.
It feels more journalistic. It feels more like what I used to do, you know, 10 years
But
ago.
what's interesting is because I've had some writers, and we've had a writer on this show, Nadia Wasif, some time back, and she said she had a second book full of everything she's cut out, which is kept in a separate file, which is, I think, quite common.
Yeah.
So in longhand writing, that's not the case because you have balls
Yeah.
of paper, which I don't think you're keeping, are you?
No.
Okay.
But you
So-
know, I've made an artwork of
Oh,
my
did you?
bald paper
Did you
from
really?
the first book. Yeah.
It's amazing.
I
That's
created a
amazing.
little work of art.
But in a way, it's kind of extinguished from your life. This is not, I'm going to go back and read the in-between chapter that's now gone kind of thing.
I like to call it a book graveyard. I don't think this book is going to have a very extensive graveyard,
Okay.
like Burnt Sugar has an
So
extensive
part of it is the
graveyard.
efficiency also. You maybe streamlined your process.
No, let's see. Let's see if it's streamlined. I think it's always so tricky. I think like, you know, it's so interesting. When I first started writing this, I had 3 separate ideas. Okay. And I thought they were 3 different books and they were, or 3 different stories. And I was just like, what? But they would just keep coming. And I couldn't figure it out. And I said, why is this happening? And I kept thinking, I'm so unfocused. I have no focus. It's this Instagram, it's social media, it's destroying me. I can't focus. And I remember, and you know, I'm very into astrology. I was telling you,
Yes.
I was walking under.
I love that.
I was.
did not expect that, by the way. So when you told me this, I
Oh
was
my
a
God,
little-
I'm like a mystic.
Yeah, I just
I'm
did
a
not
mystic.
expect. I'm a Capricorn, but anyway.
Oh, me too.
Oh, you are too?
When's your
Oh,
birthday?
January 6th.
Okay,
What about
December
you?
26th.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. I feel like.
I'm gonna do your chart one day.
Okay. Can't wait.
So I was walking under a full moon,
Mm-hmm.
and suddenly the 3 ideas, they just braided together. And suddenly it made sense that this was not 3 books, this was 1 book. And so I've really, I've just realized that you never know what the process is. Like there's something where I think I'm streamlining, but it turns out no. Or I think I'm writing one thing and then it turns into something else. And I think just being as present and open, and which is why meditation becomes so important. And I know like a lot of writers, they kind of don't like to,
They feel it might numb come of that process in a way.
well, they like to think their process is very rational.
Yeah.
And there's almost like, it's serious. Writing is so serious. And, you know, we don't want to talk about spirituality and writing in the same sentence. And, you know, that's more for the wellness world or whatever. But for me, like, I think this is all connected, you know, being present, being really in my body and present and feeling everything and sensing everything. And I mean, if you've read the book, you know that the sensory input is
huge.
everything. It's the core of the novel.
In your second book, without peering too much into it, I'm curious because you're now in Dubai and you have this daily routine. Is some of that coming into its own thing? Because that sensory, I mean, the India here is very, very palatable, right?
But I wrote this in Dubai.
Oh, this was fully written in Dubai too?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
But because, well, you said, I guess you started, I guess, kind
Started
of very
in-
early stages in.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
so
this
then
is, yeah, fully.
well, there's not much of Dubai here in this book. I'm curious if now I've lived here for 6-7 years, any of this will find its way into the book somehow.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think part of my process through like these meditative states and through kind of just imagining my way into a scene, I can travel.
Wow, you
But
channel it.
definitely, I think definitely there are layers of,
All of
of
this.
things that will come through. Definitely conversations I've
Yeah.
had or things I've overheard or
And that was my next question. Is there a peer group? I mean, do you have a secret WhatsApp group with a bunch of writers? Or is it more like friends that you're like, oh, I can write today? I mean, like, who do you turn to? Is it other writers or is it like, or both?
yeah, so I have
I need to get into
some.
that group, by the way.
Yeah, you do. It's so good.
Trash it.
I have a group. I have a couple of groups.
Okay.
I have two that are active.
Okay.
Um, we're all kind of one group. We're all kind of writer mothers,
Okay. Oh, wow.
which is so
That must be.
nourishing and soothing, and to be able
And
to really be
centering, right?
seen by, yeah, and like I don't have to explain, that it's just everyone gets it. Um, and also just this thing of like your children always talking that it's hard to have your own thoughts, right? So we all are kind of sharing that. And another group is from when I did a writing fellowship years ago in the UK.
Amazing.
And so we're a couple of
That's
writers
amazing.
there. And it's amazing. But we're just there for each other. I get to really hear from them and they get to hear from me. Like the days when we say to each other, like, I can't write another word. I've said to them, for example, a few years after Burnt Sugar came out, that I'm a fraud. Like, I can't write. Like, this was a fluke. This was a fluke. Don't judge me. It was a fluke. And, they've said similar things to me.
Yeah.
And, so it's that whole creative doubt, all of
Yeah.
that, the imposter syndrome, that feeling of like, being wrung out like a cloth creatively. I mean, all of that.
Is it emotional support or also um, do you read out passages to each other? Do you share writing?
So we haven't shared writing recently, but we do
You do.
sometimes. We do
And
sometimes.
how do you respond to critique? If someone is like, this really isn't that strong.
Oh God, very badly.
I figured.
I'm like really thin-skinned and I don't take rejection well. And, I get really sulky and,
Okay, yeah.
all of that. But I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
I think dealing with it and then coming through on the other side. And more often than not, what people are telling you is spot on,
Yeah.
that you can't see
Yeah.
it yourself. But I think you also have to learn that discernment.
Yeah.
I think MFA programs are wonderful, but I think there can be a danger in workshopping your work too early.
Yeah.
Because there's a ripening
Yeah.
that has to happen with any work, with the business, with the painting, with anything,
And
right?
also finding your own way.
Yeah, having someone else give you a solution,
Yeah.
it has to come from inside.
Sometimes I think it's like a startup or a business, like, like the Lighthouse. Like, I'm sure if I had somebody with me that had experience in restaurants and F&B, it would have been easier in some ways. But I think also some of the things that maybe the best thing about it today would have been gone because they didn't make sense from a restaurant perspective, but they made total sense to me.
Yeah.
So I think you weed out those eccentric elements, which may be the best thing in the book or in the craft, whatever that may be.
I mean, I can give you one example. I had someone tell me that I don't like the first 50 pages. I think you need to start 50 pages in. Let that be the first page. And I heard that and I was like, and the person meant very well. But I realized, this is a good, smart person, but this person doesn't really understand what I'm doing. And so also you have to know the audience. You have to know, like, the person I'm asking to critique my work or to read my work or to give me feedback, do they really understand my project? Because to be honest with you, for example, the first page of the book has been the most kind of talked about thing. And so, I mean, imagine if I had cut out the first 50 pages of the book. For a lot of people,
certainly on the press would have, I mean, I think the first line, in fact, the first page is like in every, almost every review and interview. I mean, everybody talked about it.
And a lot of people have said that, the first 50 pages are some of their favorites in the book or whatever.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's, so you have to kind of know, you have to discern. You have to be discerning even in what people tell you and kind of detached.
Well, it's not a book you can put down. I can tell you that much. I mean that. Honestly, it's not a book you can put down. So I can't imagine it without the first 50 pages. But there are books that you read and you really enjoy, and I can pause and I can even leave them for a week or two, sometimes longer, and go back, and I enjoy it. But
Mm,
this is not the first, not the second time. It's not a book you can like
mm.
start and be like, like you can be indifferent. You kind of like, it's fascinating. I want to shift gears here, and ask you about something. We both live in Dubai. You've been here for a long time. I don't feel we have a very vibrant. I'm probably wrong in the sense that I'm sure there's a private scene, but from public perspective, and someone that's also quite interested and involved, frankly, in the arts and culture space, as are you, I don't feel we have a very vibrant literary scene. One, I would like you to explain why you think, from your perspective, that's the case. And number two, just that we're not just sort of bitching and moaning, what can be done? I mean, concretely, what can be done about it? You mentioned a circle, which is a fantastic,
It's
fantastic
fantastic.
platform. I'm a huge fan of everybody there. Um, but they've probably come to you through friends or something. It's very much a one-on-one. This is not a institutionalized process in the sense for writers. It is for artists, but not for writers. So explain it to me from your perspective.
I mean, I think it's just that. I think you've hit the nail on the head, that it's really about having the institutional support. Like, at the end of the day, writing is, publishing can mean big money, but literature doesn't always. And I think there has to be institutional support if you want literary work. I'm not, of course, like I'm nothing against maybe a self-help market or other kinds
No,
of
no, no. I
books,
understand, but exactly, you
but
need you need building blocks.
yeah.
You need the infrastructure. So what is it? Is it a writers program? Is it a fabulous new book fair? Is it all? I mean, where does one start? If I was today, the government trying to do something, or even a private individual, family that wants to support literature,
Yeah.
what would be the first steps?
I mean, for example, I think with the Emirates Literature Foundation has just started the Siddiqui Writers Fellowship for
Okay, I didn't
young
even know
writers.
that that's great.
Yeah, so they've started a Writers Fellowship,
Okay,
which is, I think they've got 10 or 12 fellows from the country
amazing.
who are working on works of fiction. I'm mentoring one
Oh,
of them
amazing.
this year. I ran a workshop for
So they
them.
pair them with
They
mentors.
pair them with like well-respected agents, mentors,
Amazing.
other writers from all over the world.
And they got Siddiqui to sponsor it, essentially. That's
Yes.
great. Well
In
done.
previous years, what they've done is they've done a kind of trip at the end of the process where they've taken them to New York to meet agents, and they've even done. I think it was at the Gotham Writers Workshop. They've run workshops for
That's
them.
the one I took.
Oh, that's the one you took?
The
Yeah.
one I went
So
many, many years ago. Gosh.
yeah. So I think, I think that's a great program. I think to have more programs like that, I think to have a really robust residency program where you can have writers come live for a period of time. Dubai is very expensive. Like,
Yes.
writers don't make a lot of
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
One of the ways writers do make money is through working as teachers at
Yes.
universities.
And to your point earlier about having a studio, you need a space. Even if you can afford your rent, you need a space to go and do this, right? If you have a
Yeah.
family and young kids and so on, there's no way you can write,
Yeah.
in peace.
I think the Emirates Foundation is also starting a writer center, and I think
Okay.
they might be building or creating office spaces for writers to come and work. So I definitely think they're taking great, strides. But I agree with you. Like, I think there could be
More.
a lot
A
more.
lot
There's a
more.
lot more. And I think there are so many brilliant writers in this country, brilliant writers in the region,
Yeah.
brilliant writers from all over the world.
Especially given how much of a melting pot this place is.
100%.
You also
Writers
get
from
people.
South
I was
Asia,
gonna say, so you get writers writing for all perspectives. Right? I mean,
yeah.
if I were in Egypt, 95% of the writers would be Egyptian, writing about Egypt, and that's very important. Or in India, same thing. But here, you can have people writing about pretty much anywhere.
Yeah.
So the diversity of thought is
And
amazing.
and writing across all forms. I
And
mean, you
forms.
can have poetry, you can have plays, you can have script writing. Like, I mean, there's so much possibility, I think, here, and it's still in a lot of areas, quite nascent. I think doing more festivals, bigger festivals. You know, the Emirates Literature Festival, they do this beautiful event where, you know, I think they do a poetry reading in the
Yes.
desert.
Yes.
I would love to see a full festival in
no,
the desert. You know,
no.
we have this incredible landscape here. Like,
You're right.
I think, you know, there could be so
We're
much.
gonna look into this. I think
Yeah,
it's a, honestly,
I'm leaving it to you.
yeah. No. I mean, not leave it to me, but I love the idea. I mean, it's like, you know, I was telling you earlier, I mean, this idea of kind of, again, and not necessarily borrowing from New York, but the New Yorker kind of festival, you know, where you have writers and thinkers and get together for a day and you read poetry and you have talks and you showcase. I mean, that's beautiful.
Look at the Jaipur Literature Festival. Why
exactly.
couldn't you do it here?
Yes, exactly.
You could do it here,
That's right.
I think.
Here, we planted the seed.
Yeah.
Avni, thank you. This was fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
On your honestly talent and great first book, and we can't wait for the second book and the movie and all the good things that are to come.
Thank you so much. I loved chatting with you.
Thank you.